construction. It's definitely a high-stakes game, right? But here's a statistic that might just stop you in your tracks. It has the second highest failure rate of any industry in the United States, second only to restaurants.
Yeah.
That's pretty staggering, especially for something as fundamental as construction.
It truly is. And,
Yeah.
well, what's particularly striking, I think, is that this wasn't even really widely known until quite a bit of research in maybe the 1990s.
Yeah.
And it uncovered that these failures,
Yeah.
they aren't inevitable. They're often entirely preventable.
Exactly. Which challenges so many assumptions.
It really does.
So today we're taking a deep dive into Thomas C. Schleifer's The Business of Construction Contracting. And this book is just packed with strategies for, not just surviving, but actually building a profitable, sustainable construction business. Our mission here is really to unpack those critical factors, the ones often overlooked that separate the companies that thrive from the ones that, falter or fail. We're going to challenge some common myths, maybe reveal some surprising truths, and hopefully give you a shortcut to understanding what it really takes to succeed in this, let's face it, incredibly complex industry.
And it's really about a fundamental shift, isn't it? A shift in perspective for a lot of contractors, moving beyond just being a skilled builder to becoming an astute, strategic business manager.
That sounds like the key right there.
Yeah, that transformation is just crucial for long-term viability, especially with all the challenges today, supply chains, new regulations, you name it.
So let's dig into that core problem then. When a construction business underperforms or, fails, a lot of people might assume it's about shoddy work on site or operational stuff. But the book points to something much more fundamental, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The research makes it, pretty crystal clear. The biggest reason these businesses struggle isn't because they can't do the work. They're often excellent builders.
Right.
It's primarily because they aren't managed as profitable business concerns. There's often a huge disconnect there.
Wow. That's a powerful realization. So what specifically did the research find? The book breaks it down into 3 critical pillars for any construction business. What are those?
Yeah, it distills it down really nicely. 3 equally vital functional areas. First, you've got getting the work. That's your marketing, your sales.
Okay.
Second, doing the work. That's production, operations, the actual building.
The part most people focus on.
Exactly. And third, accounting for the work. Finance, administration, keeping track of it all. All 3 have to be strong.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because most contractors, especially maybe in that small to mid-size range, they pride themselves on being jacks of all trades. But the book reveals something fascinating, that even a weakness in just one of these 3 areas can actually sink a company, even if they're amazing at the other 2.
That's the critical finding. It tells us that true mastery in this industry isn't just about the technical skill, swinging a hammer or pouring concrete. It's about recognizing these 3 functions are distinct, specialized skill sets. And frankly, very few individuals are true masters of all 3.
So that jack of all trades idea might actually be a liability?
It can be. And what's also crucial is how decisions get made. That traditional model, the boss calls all the shots.
Yeah.
That's a huge risk factor identified in the research, because it often means one person's strengths and weaknesses dominate everything. Collaboration, getting input from experts across all 3 areas, that significantly improves the quality of decisions.
It reminds me of an analogy the book uses. It's pretty stark. Think about it like a really high-stakes bet. Would you take a, say, $1 million bet at 6-to-1 odds if losing meant something catastrophic, like playing Russian roulette?
Right.
The sheer magnitude of the risk matters just as much as the odds themselves.
Precisely. It's not just about the probability, it's about the consequence. And just like you wouldn't rush into that kind of bet, the book emphasizes that the speed of those high-level business decisions can be just as risky.
Ah, okay. So faster isn't always better.
Definitely not for critical decisions. Research actually suggests that speeding up those key business decisions almost always reduces their quality. It's only appropriate in genuine emergencies. Slowing down those crucial conversations, vetting things properly, it always leads to better outcomes.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears a bit. We hear it all the time in business, right? Grow or die.
The classic mantra.
But this book offers a really counterintuitive take on growth, particularly in construction. What's the hidden danger there?
Yeah, it's a common belief, but the book argues it's actually quite dangerous in this industry. That idea, if you're not growing, you're going backward.
Yeah.
This deep dive argues that rapid, undirected growth is extremely risky, can even be a primary driver of failure. It calls it the incidental growth pattern.
Incidental growth. Okay, and the really painful truth is growth literally eats cash, doesn't it? You can't just hire half an employee, right? So growth often forces this jump in fixed overhead costs.
Exactly. You hire a new project manager, maybe get more office space, more equipment.
Right.
And that compels companies to chase even more work just to cover those new higher costs. It becomes this kind of vicious cycle.
Yeah, I can see how that spiral starts.
And rapid or sustained growth puts an enormous strain on everything the company's finances, its people, its systems. They just aren't built for it sometimes. Construction companies, particularly, often pay out more cash than they collect during these growth phases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they eventually just run out of working capital or max out their credit lines. The book actually flags an annual growth rate approaching, say, 15%. As a significant risk indicator.
15%. That's a number to watch.
It really demands serious thought about how you're going to finance that additional work, not just how you're going to do it.
Let's make this concrete. There's a prime example in the book, a real-world story they call the apartment complex disaster. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. It's a classic case. So you had this highly successful contractor, right, typically doing about $16 million a year in revenue. Pretty solid. They decided to bid on an $8 million luxury condominium project.
Okay, that's a big jump. That's double their usual largest job, right? More than double.
Exactly. And they were the only local bidder, which they saw as a big advantage.
But what was a critical mistake there? What did they miss?
Well, the book argues the critical misstep was really psychological. Deep down, they kind of scaled the project down in their minds. They tried to make it fit their existing experience, rather than truly confronting the massive increase in scale and complexity.
So they underestimated it from the start.
Pretty much. And the project itself had unfamiliar elements. It was in a different area. The developer was from out of state with different expectations. Things like needing specific on-site personnel roles filled, a licensed surveyor requirement they weren't used to, little things that add up.
And then, as the project got going, cash flow became a nightmare, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Slow payments from the developer plus retainage. That's the money held back until the very end.
Right, the guarantee.
It just squeezed them.
Yeah.
The contractor ended up maxing out all his credit lines. He even had to take a second mortgage on his own home just to keep the payroll going and materials flowing.
That is immense pressure.
Unbelievable pressure. And as that mounted, they started losing control internally. A key, experienced project manager left because of the strain.
Right.
They had to move less experienced superintendents into critical roles they weren't ready for.
Oh, boy.
It just cascaded. Lost control of costs, schedule slipped, eventual failure.
So what's the big takeaway from that story?
What it just screams is that even highly profitable, successful companies can be forced right out of business just by taking on one single project that's too far outside their comfort zone, whether it's size or project type or even just the location.
That apartment complex story really drives home the danger of stepping too far outside your lane. But it also brings up a bigger point about risk, doesn't it? Beyond the obvious stuff, on-site safety, materials handling, what are the real dangers? The hidden ones that actually sink companies.
It's such a crucial distinction. Construction pros are, hyper-aware of field risks, safety meetings, hard hats, all that. And those risks often have insurance coverage.
Right.
But they frequently overlook, or maybe even dismiss, business risks. Financial risks, strategic risks, management risks. And here's the kicker, the statistic that jumps out. 99% of construction failures are caused by these business risks.
99%.
And they are very rarely insured.
Wow. Okay, that completely reframes things. So if business risk is the real killer and the industry is so cyclical, booms and busts, how do you manage those fixed costs like overhead, rent, core staff? That stuff doesn't just disappear in a downturn.
That's a great question. And the book introduces a really powerful concept here called flexible overhead.
Flexible overhead. Okay. What does that look like in practice?
It means designing your business so you can strategically adjust those fixed costs. Things like maybe using high-quality temporary employees for peaks instead of permanent hires you're stuck with in troughs.
Like flexing your workforce.
Exactly.
Right.
Or renting specialized equipment when you need it, instead of owning it and having it sit idle during slow periods. The goal shifts. It's not about continuous growth at all costs. It becomes about achieving continuous profit, adapting smoothly to whatever the market is doing.
Because the market does cycle. The book points out, right, that there have been downturns roughly every 10 years since World War II.
That's the historical pattern. Pretty consistent.
So ignoring that reality and just fighting tooth and nail for every single project by slashing prices when things slow down, that just makes things worse for everyone, does
It
it?
absolutely does. It just intensifies the competition, drives down margins, and weakens the whole industry.
Mm.
And what's really fascinating and kind of tragic is that many companies don't actually fail during the downturn itself.
Oh, when do they fail?
They often fail during the market recovery
During the recovery. Why then?
because they're too financially weakened from fighting the downturn. They've
Yeah.
burned through their cash, strained their credit, maybe cut corners they shouldn't have.
Just to survive the slump.
Exactly. So when opportunities pick up again, they don't have the resources or the strength to actually capitalize. They're running on fumes.
That's counterintuitive, but makes total sense. You survive the battle, but lose the war later.
Precisely. And this idea of maybe streamlining in the wrong way, disassembling your own expertise, it brings us to another critical point. Perhaps the most proactive thing you can do.
Which is?
Strategic project selection. Choosing the right battles to fight in the first place.
Okay, let's connect that. There's another cautionary tale in the book, right? The mechanical failure. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, this one's really insightful about understanding your own business. So you had this mechanical contracting firm, very successful, operated 3 distinct divisions for over 50 years, consistently turning out above average profits. A solid, respected company.
Okay, sounds great. What went wrong?
Well, a new generation of leadership came in, and they decided to streamline the company,
Yeah.
make it leaner, more focused, maybe look better on paper.
Uh-oh. Streamline how?
They sold off the highly profitable service division, the part that did ongoing maintenance and smaller jobs. And they also got rid of their internal fabrication shops, aiming to reduce overhead costs and push for higher overall sales volume from the main contracting divisions.
So cut the support functions to focus on the big projects. Did it work? Did sales go up?
Well, yes and no. They did manage to increase total sales by about 20% the following year, which, on the surface looks like success, growth.
Wow.
But despite that increased volume, the company never had another profitable year after that reorganization. Not one.
Never profitable again after 50 years of success. Why? What did the streamlining actually do?
If you connect it to the bigger picture, like the book does, it becomes devastatingly clear. The new leadership fundamentally failed to understand the complex interplay, the synergies between their divisions.
Synergies they dismantled.
Exactly. For instance, that service division they sold off. It had been quietly absorbing a lot of the startup costs and punch list items, the final fix-it tasks for the bigger projects done by the other divisions.
So it made the other divisions look more profitable than they actually were on their own.
Precisely. And those internal fabrication shops, they weren't just overhead. They provided crucial on-time internal supply of custom components. They offered flexibility and responsiveness that external suppliers just couldn't match, especially under pressure.
So their streamlining actually just disassembled their core competitive advantages, their real expertise and efficiency.
That's exactly what happened. They broke the machine while trying to tune it up.
Wow. Okay, so that failure underlines the danger of not understanding your own business. And it leads us, like you said, straight into how critical project selection is.
Right, because that mechanical firm, they essentially selected a new business model that didn't fit their historic strengths. And this deep dive emphasizes a really crucial, almost philosophical concept about projects themselves.
Okay, what's that?
There are no inherently bad projects.
No bad projects, only bad contractors.
Not quite. No bad projects, only bad matches between a specific project and a specific contractor's experience, capabilities, and resources at that moment in time.
Ah, okay. That's a huge mindset shift. So it's not the project's fault, it's about the fit.
Exactly. Project risk is always relative to your company's unique profile.
So how do you assess that fit? What are the key variables a contractor needs to really scrutinize?
The book lays out several critical dimensions. First, obviously, is project size. We saw that with the apartment complex. Larger projects, even if it's work you know how to do, introduce financial strain, require different management skills, attract more scrutiny.
Right. Size matters. What else?
Project type. Seems obvious, but the nuances kill you. Switching from, say, building roads to building bridges, or from public sector work with established processes to fast-paced private development. Or even something subtle, like shifting from concrete pipe gravity sewers to force mains and utility work. These introduce significant differences in risk, methods, and personnel needed. If you don't respect those differences and plan for them, big losses can follow.
Okay, size type. What's next?
Geographic area. This trips up so many expanding companies. Every locality, every region has its own ecosystem, different labor pools, different subcontractor capabilities and reliability, different local customs, different building codes, different inspectors, and how they interpret things.
Yeah, you can't just assume what works in Dallas works the same way in Denver.
Absolutely not. Expanding without deep local knowledge is incredibly risky. And finally, you have to look at the project team and any unusual features. Meaning, does your proposed team, the project manager, the superintendent, have direct hands-on experience with this specific type and size of project? Or are you stretching them? And are there unusual design elements? Complex geometry like curved walls, new materials, cutting-edge tech, anything your team hasn't tackled before significantly ramps up the risk.
Okay, that's a lot to weigh. Size, type, location, team experience, unusual features. How do you actually, measure this? Is it just gut feel?
Well, gut feel plays a role, but the book argues strongly against relying only on that. It introduces a proprietary tool, a system called the Project Selection Program. This tool basically helps firms scientifically quantify the risk of a potential project based on their specific documented experience across all those variables we just discussed.
Okay, how does it work, roughly?
It starts conceptually at a 50% probability of success, basically a coin toss, a pure guess.
Right, a neutral starting point.
Then, as you feed in specific information about the project's size relative to your past work, the type similarity, your team's exact experience, the location familiarity, the probability adjusts, up or down. It forces an objective look at the actual fit. And what's the target? What probability are companies aiming for before saying yes?
The book suggests most successful businesses, using this kind of disciplined approach, aim for a 75% or higher probability of success before they'll commit to bidding or taking on a project.
75% or more. Okay, that really takes a lot of the guesswork and maybe the ego out of the bidding process.
It certainly tries to. It enforces discipline. But, even picking the right projects isn't the whole story. Sustaining success requires really rigorous financial management and robust accounting practices day in, day out.
Yeah, that third pillar, accounting for the work. Absolutely. Accounting isn't just, a necessary evil or a cost center. It's a critical strategic tool. Timely and accurate financial reporting is vital, especially for something called work in progress, or WIP reporting, and calculating the percentage of completion on ongoing jobs.
Why is that specific calculation so important?
Because it's incredibly easy to be overly optimistic about how far along a project is. And if you overestimate your percentage complete, you can mask significant losses for months, even years. The company thinks it's making money on a job, allocates resources based on that assumption.
While it's actually bleeding cash.
Exactly. Until suddenly, near the end, the real numbers come crashing down, and it's often far too late to recover.
That is a genuinely scary thought for any business owner, just flying blind financially.
It happens more often than you'd think. So that accurate, conservative WIP reporting is non-negotiable.
Okay, so that's the big picture financial health. What about the day-to-day, the actual project controls on site?
It's also critical. Beyond the overall financials, you need tight operational controls. This includes several key areas. First is productivity analysis. Simply put, measuring output relative to input. How many feet of pipe laid per crew hour? How many square feet of drywall hung per worker day?
Tracking actual performance.
Yes, and crucially, benchmarking it against your own historical data from similar past work. That's how you learn, spot problems early, and improve future estimates.
Makes sense. What else?
Scheduling. Using formal methods like critical path management CPM. This isn't just about listing tasks, it's about identifying the longest sequence of dependent activities that determines the overall project duration.
The critical path itself.
Right. You manage that path relentlessly to prevent overall delays. It tells you where you absolutely cannot afford to slip.
Okay. Productivity, scheduling.
Then there's budgeting. But not just the initial estimate. It's about truly understanding the difference between the project's cost and its price. And critically, carrying specific monetary contingencies reserves explicitly linked to the risks you identified during project selection, not just burying some fluff in the overall number.
So, targeted contingency for known risks.
Exactly. And finally, there's a powerful set of tools under the umbrella of Earned Value Management, or EVM.
EVM? Sounds technical. What does it tell you?
It gives you key metrics, like the Cost Performance Index, or CPI, that tells you if you're getting the value you planned for the money you've spent. Are you under or over budget for the work actually done?
Okay.
And the Schedule Performance Index, or SPI, are you headed behind schedule in terms of the value of work completed? These metrics quantify performance objectively. They give project managers early warnings if things are starting to go off track, allowing them to take proactive steps before problems become catastrophic.
So it's like an early warning system based on real data?
That's a great way to put it. All these controls, financial and operational, feed into managing a sustainable, resilient business. And there's one more piece, often overlooked, especially in those closely held, maybe family-run construction firms.
What's that?
Leadership transitions, succession planning.
Ah, yeah. The founder who built it all. How does the company survive beyond them?
It's a huge challenge because the book argues the real sum and substance of a construction company. It's decades of experience, it's hard-won insights, it's crucial relationships with clients, subs, suppliers. It often resides entirely in the heads of a few key people.
The institutional knowledge.
Exactly.
Wow.
And you can't just transfer that overnight.
Yeah.
Delegating real authority, actively mentoring and preparing replacements,
Yeah.
that takes years, decades sometimes.
But it's absolutely critical for long-term survival, isn't it? And also for just building managerial maturity throughout the company, retaining your best talent.
Absolutely. It ensures the company doesn't just lose its core knowledge, its brain, when key people inevitably leave, whether that's planned retirement or something unexpected.
Without that planning, that continuity.
A company that can adapt, that hasn't built that next layer of leadership and embedded that knowledge, it'll either fold when circumstances change or maybe just drop back to being a marginally surviving entity losing its edge.
Just treading water.
Pretty much. Adaptation requires that depth.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground today about what really makes a construction business not just, survive, but actually thrive. From those three critical functional areas, getting the work, doing the work, and accounting for the work, to the tricky nuances of growth, the real hidden business risks, the science behind selecting the right projects, and just how vital those financial and operational controls are day to day.
Yeah, and I think if there's one key takeaway, one thread through all of this, it's that success hinges on a pretty profound shift for many in the industry. It's moving from seeing yourself primarily as a skilled builder to embracing the role of an astute business manager.
Builder and business manager.
It's about making informed strategic decisions, rigorously assessing business risk, and constantly adapting to the market, even when that means, maybe embracing continuous profit instead of just chasing relentless growth.
That's a powerful closing thought. So, thinking about everything we've discussed, what really stands out to you listening right now from our deep dive today? Maybe consider this. If your current business practices, your assumptions, your strategies were put under the microscope against these kinds of scientifically proven approaches for long-term success, how would they measure up? What's maybe one belief you hold about the construction business that you might need to challenge? Or what's one change, even a small one, you could implement starting tomorrow to make sure your business isn't just building projects, but actually building a lasting legacy of sustained profit and control?